We're KC101, your hometown country station. It's time for another edition of Saturdays with Seniors, brought to you by FCCB, First Citizens Community Bank, the local branches in Wellsboro, Mansfield, and Blossburg. Proud sponsors of Saturdays with Seniors here on KC101. Our guest today, Bud Scofield, joins us. Grew up in Latonia, which is in Tioga County, but not too many people know where it is. And we're going to learn about that and his snowmobiling days and his adventures. And he's a veteran as well, and we've got so many things to talk about. How old are you, Bud?
90.
90 years old.
90 years old.
I would never have guessed you to be 90 years. How long have you been 90 years old?
July 28th. It hasn't been long.
Not long at all. Well, happy birthday and congratulations. You're doing wonderful. You drove yourself here at 90 years old.
I just made an 1,150-mile trip to my daughter's for my birthday. My grandchildren just came back from in the military from England, and my other grandson come down from Kansas City with his twins, and we had a nice gathering.
Wow. That's just amazing. You're just blowing my mind here on all this stuff. So let's go back to the very beginning. You were born in
Ansonia.
In Ansonia.
1932.
So 1932. Great Depression's going on at this time, if I remember my history right.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
what did your parents do?
I've lived on a farm with my grandparents, and so we never went hungry. We always had cows, milk and butter and cheese and a whole bit, never was hungry. Money was tight, but I didn't know the difference at the time. Everything was good. Everybody was in the same shape, everybody was kind of poor.
Yeah. And where was the farm?
Just about a mile and a half west of Ansonia. My grandpa's name was Monty Apgar. And years prior, he was the head herdsman up at the county home for a number of years.
So how long had your parents lived on the farm that you grew up on before you were born? Quite a while?
15 years, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So tell me about your early memories of farming. By the time you were 7, it was 1940. Did you have chores? And what do you remember about the farm in those early days?
It was all done with horses, and it was hard work. Everything was done by hand, and we raised strawberries and corn and whatever was in season. Made maple syrup in the wintertime and had that, of course, towards spring. But we had a boiling pot up in the woods. I've sat there a lot of times all night boiling sap.
Just a big kettle that you would put wood under?
It was a pan about 4 foot long and maybe 18 inches deep. And you just kept putting more sap in, boiling it down. And Grandpa always finished it at the house on the wood stove. Mm-hmm. Yep, cut wood, had wood stove. That was a adventure.
So where'd you get your water from?
Had a spring, and that was another chore. For a number of years, it was an endless cable down over the bank, and you turned the crank and wound the bucket of water and brought it up, carried it in the house, and then got more modern and had a electric pump put on there with a storage tank in the basement. So we had running water at that time. But it was a number of years that it was cranked up.
Just right off the surface of the river. Whatever you got, you got.
Well, no, it was a good spring. And at that point in time, my grandpa also, besides farming, he was a foreman at the CC camp in Darling Run.
They've got some placards and stuff about what used to be there, and I've talked to a few people that have lived a long life that do remember that. Do you remember the CCC camp?
Very well. I've got a lot of pictures of it. I got them from the forestry department. Maynard Bliss. I don't know if you ever heard of Maynard Bliss. He lived to be, I think, right around 100. He lived out by Weiss's store out that way.
So the CCC camps are there. What were the buildings? They're active when you were there, and for those that don't know, it was a government work program. Basically, this is the Great Depression years we're talking about, and the government was trying to basically provide jobs for young boys. Right? Is that
they got $1 a day and room and board, and that was built right on the railroad. I don't know how they ever got any sleep there because the railroad run right in back of the barracks. It was the military that run the operation there. started from Roosevelt, started that. But it was, like you said, to put people to work. And it was all young boys, and most of them was out of cities, And my grandpa had some great times with those young boys, trying to get them to learn to chop with an axe and cut with a saw and whatever, Yeah, he'd bring home some great stories.
A little different work ethic. Now, I think if the government said, hey, we got jobs that have the same problems as everybody else, we can't find people to work. I'm sure at that time, if there was 100 jobs somewhere, there would be 1,000 people lined up then.
Exactly. They wanted to work back then. There was no giveaway programs like there is today. You had to work.
That's right. During the Great Depression, it was after the Great Depression that unemployment and disability and a lot of these government programs that were here to assist came out. So it was, you're on your own, or the church would help you, or friends or neighbors helping neighbors.
Yep. Most everything boomed after World War II. That's when things started shaping up. And I went to work in 1950 with a gas company in Savensville. It was New York State Natural at that time. I worked on the first well that was drilled in Kittle Creek, Dorsey Calhoun. A lot of people never heard about that, but we have a big pump station down there now at Tamarack yet. But that's where I worked 38 and a half years. I was a corrosion technician. I worked from Cinemahoning all the way to Albany, New York.
So the wells that were in Watrous, is that your time period too? I've been wanting to know more about those.
No, I have a lot of pictures of that. I can remember when I was going to school when they pumped those wells. And they pumped that in a big tank there, and they used to come from Bradford and get that oil. But it was pretty well gone by the time I was around. There wasn't no drilling going on.
Where did your family go to get stuff? Where was your supply? Or did you go to Wellsboro, to Gailton? And how often did you leave the farm when you were younger?
When I was on the farm, before I went to Latonia, my grandpa and grandma shopped most everything at Dunham's. And at that time, a lot of people don't know about that, there was a rolling store, they called it. And that came once a week. And it had a body on there with all kinds of food inside. They had a refrigerator that had meat. That was my big thing, to come to town, to go to Dunham's and get raised donuts. It was 50 cents a dozen.
And worth every penny.
Yeah, it was good. I'd eat them, usually half of them, before I got back home. My grandpa had a 1936 Chevrolet, and the price of that at that time was $729 for a four-door Chevrolet car.
You can't buy the tires for that now.
No. No, that's for sure. Well, I have seen some very good times, been very, very fortunate. Before I retired, I bought a fifth wheel trailer and spent 31 winters in Florida and hauled out all over the United States, as in every state but Hawaii with it, and couldn't find how to float it over there.
You would otherwise.
Wow. But I had a great retirement. I've been retired 34 years, and I want to get 4 more years of retirement to have as much retirement as I did working.
You'll have it balanced out. So you're a veteran, I understand.
Yes, that is right. I went in February the 16th of 1953 and served to February 16th of 55. I was in 2 atomic bomb blasts in Nevada, Yucca Flats and Frenchman Flats. A lot of people saw that on the news. All kinds of experiments. Now, if they have an oil spill or something, they got all kinds of clothing and protection on. We had nothing, not even earplugs.
When you say you were in an atomic blast, how close, were you?
We were a half a mile from ground zero. It was the first one shot from the 280 gun. A lot of people never saw that, but it had a barrel 90 feet long.
So you knew this was coming, right? This wasn't a surprise?
Oh, no surprise to this. We were in a trench that they took like a bulldozer and made maybe 4 foot wide or a little more, and it was probably 3 foot deep. And we got down on our hands and knees and covered our eyes, and they said, you'll still see the light from the explosion, and then stand up. Well, we did on the first one. but we had sense enough not to stand up the second time because the shock wave knocks you right on your butt. And they had rabbits tied in pens. They tied them by their nose with an alarm clock in there because the rabbit went to sleep when they tied them by their nose. So the alarm clock went off like 20 seconds before the shot, and the gun was 5 miles from ground zero. They had regular pigs with uniforms on, ODs and khakis to see what the heat would do to that. Sheep was tied at different distances. I saw the wool burn right off on the side towards the blast. There was houses at different distances with dummy people sitting at the tables. Some of the houses were at the closest were just leveled, and other ones that got further away. It wasn't as much damage, but we had to walk through all that. And I always said, I guess all the radiation I got killed all the bad stuff in me because I've made it to 90. So.
Who knows? Maybe that atomic blast was the secret fountain of youth for you. Something worked, obviously.
No, you don't want to be there.
So what were your thoughts after surviving an atomic test blast? Were you like, wow, that was amazing? Or were you scared of what you went through and what would happen?
We were more excited about it than the government was because they didn't care what happened to you, you know. But I have been compensated for some of that. I get a little disability from being exposed to that, but I wouldn't volunteer to go to it again, that's for sure. We were there 14 days. At the time, I was in Camp Pickett, Virginia, and they picked us up there with airplanes and flew us out. It was a company from Orlando, Florida. It was called Resort Airlines, and they had old C-147 planes that they took bus seats out of school buses and put in those planes for seats. And that's what we flew out. We was out there 14 days and then flew us back into Camp Pickett, Virginia. So still had to carry that old M1 with you. You took it wherever you went.
Have you met other people who have survived an atomic blast? Are there still some folks around?
I do not know of anybody in this area that's alive. I belong to the National Association of Radiation Survivors for years. Then the gentleman and his wife that run that, when he passed away, it dissolved.
All right. Later on, you fell in love with snowmobiling. Tell me about that passion.
My first snowmobile I bought from Tilford Parsons in Ansonia. And I think it was, can't remember the year that I bought the first one, but I went down to Tilford selling memberships for our sportsman's club up in Gaines, and he said, try it out. And I said, no, I don't want to get froze. But he talked me into putting on his suit and helmet, and I took a ride that morning, and that afternoon I went down and bought one and put hundreds of miles on the things. I rode until we didn't have snow for a number of years, and I quit. In fact, I started going to Florida.
And somewhere along the way, you ended up in Latonia.
Well, that was in 1939. My dad was working at Ward's Foundry in Blossburg, and he lost his job because the foundry burned. And at the time, there was an opening in Latonia for the forest ranger. Politics had changed. Every time that politics changed, those jobs changed at that time. It was Democrat. It went to Republican, and my dad got the job. A lot of people, the older ones, would remember Leslie Wood. He was the old game warden here in Tioga County at the time, and he put in a good word for my dad. And we got sent in Latonia in 1939. I went to school in there for 3 years.
There was a school in Latonia.
There was a school I went to 3 years, a one-room school.
Because Latonia has 15 houses right now, whatever it is. It was bigger then?
Those houses over there were tannery houses. That was one of the largest shoe sole tannery anywhere around this area.
In Latonia.
In Latonia with 2 sawmills. It was a booming place in the late 20s, but the CC camp was there at the time. Jay Lau had 7 kids, and he moved out of Latonia, and that closed the school down.
One family moving out.
One family moved and shut the school down, but I had the choice to have a teacher at the house or Elk Township to board me out. So I chose to get boarded out. So that's how I got to go to Gaines High School.
So what do you mean by the town boarded you out?
They paid my tuition.
So how did you get to school then? Did you have to provide your own transportation?
No, there was a bus run from Gaines to Ansonia, and at that time, Asaph went to Gaines to school, and then later on they come to Wellsboro. My old school bus driver kind of took a liking to me, and Miller's had the store there at Ansonia, and that's where the post office was, and a beer garden on the end with rooms upstairs. When Miller's, they went to Florida back then, and they brought home with them one spring a soft serve ice cream. Now, this was in probably 1944, something like that. And the ice cream was a nickel. I didn't have no money, but my bus driver, he used to buy me an ice cream cone.
Wow. So what were things like around here during World War II? People were away. There were businesses open. I know there were rationing stuff. Tell me what life was like in Tioga County in World War II.
There was lots of rationing. Everything you had, a book of ration tickets. You had a book for gasoline, and that depended on your job. And if you was a farmer, you got extra, but sugar, everything, you tore out stamps and gave it to them. You was only allowed so many.
Was it a very limited amount, or it was just so you didn't waste? Or was there enough to do what you wanted, or you really did have to
It was limited, I would say.
So that vacation to go driving would probably not happen.
Oh, you didn't go very far driving. Gasoline was very short. You had a number on your car. No, I guess maybe it was a letter, A, B, and C or something like that. Wellsboro was pretty busy. Dunham's was the main deal at the time, They had everything from little chicks to, whatever you could think of. Dunham's had it.
It would have been Roy and Frank Dunham that were around then, I believe. And Fanny would have been around.
Yeah, I think Roy.
R.J. Dunham, Roy J. Dunham, the R.J. Dunham Company, yeah.
And I can remember old man Dunham bought the drive-in theater out at the Y. He used to take stuff out there and set up and run that show out there, while the one in town, they owned the one here in town too.
Yep, that would have been Frank, I think, that opened the Y.
Yeah, Frank, yeah. I think you're right there instead of Roy. There was a Roy.
Roy's the department store.
Yeah.
And Frank was the theater, I believe. I should actually ask someone from Dunham's on that question again.
Yeah, you probably know more about it than I do on that. You've heard more about that.
Well, we had Nancy Dunham on before, and we've talked about some of the stuff and the neat history there. Did you used to go to the movies when you were younger?
Yes, not too often. It was a quarter, I think, to go to the movie. And I had friends in Ansonia. They moved down from Wellsboro and bought the old Jinx place down there, Merle and Abby Phillips. And they had a daughter, Joan, and Jean. And Jean and May hooked up together when he come down there. He was 3 years younger than May, but we done a lot of fishing together and spent a lot of time together. And his folks used to bring me up with the kids, the other two, and go to the movies. That was a big thing, to come to Wellsboro and go to the movies.
How did you get your news in the earliest days? Was it radio at night or
radio?
Newspaper?
Yep. That was before TV, that's for sure. Yeah, we had radio and down on the farm. Then they got television off an antenna outside, and that was snowy and you couldn't hardly see it. Come and went according to the weather.
Yep. And then when did you get your first car? What was it?
I got my first car in 1948. I had a 41 Ford, and I bought it at Bozick's in Gelton, and it used as much oil as it did gas.
I had a car like that. Well, it was a quart with every fill up in the car, yeah.
Yeah. When you filled up the gas, you put a quart of oil in.
Yep.
And then I went to work in 1950, and I bought a new Ford. And then in 52, I bought another one. And I just had bought that when my friends and neighbors sent me my wishes for the go to the service. Well, at $78 a month is what you went in the military at, and my payment was like $65. My dad helped me out for a number of months until I got a little bit of rank and could handle it for myself. Kept my car, and that way I came back and forth from Camp Pickett, Virginia, back home. 500 miles from the campground down there to back to Gaines.
Well, luckily gas wasn't $5 a gallon.
No, it was probably 75 cents a gallon
even less
or
than
something.
that.
Something like that. Yeah, it was a whole lot different, that's for sure.
Anything else that you'd like to share? We're running out of time here, but anything else you'd like to share before we wrap things up?
Not that I can think of, unless you got some questions.
I got a whole bunch of questions answered, so I appreciate your information. I guess let me ask you about the telephone. When did you get your first phone? I love these questions of things that everyone takes for granted that are here.
We had a wall phone, a crank phone on the wall, and when the phone rang, a lot of times you'd have to ask the other people to hang up because you couldn't hear them. They all rubbered because everybody knew when the phone rang, so they picked up the receiver.
I've heard that term, rubbered. That means listening in on your eavesdropping.
Exactly, Yep, you'd have to say, can't hear, hang up, so I can hear. You know?
Okay, because, in the old phone systems, each one was pulling some of the audio off the line.
Exactly. Later on, I got into buying and selling antiques, and I sold a lot of those old wall phones. They were a big deal for a long time.
Yeah.
And then they went to the candlestick where it sat on a round base, and the receiver was on the hook.
The hook, yeah.
And they were a big seller, too.
And the term, the phone is off the hook, actually made sense at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Remember when you first got a phone, someone had to teach you how to use one? I've seen the old instruction books back then. Even the rotary phones, they had instructions because it was a whole new concept.
Yeah, I don't know. Phone was there when I can remember it on the wall.
Goes back that far.
Yep. And that was in the 30s, you know.
You would talk to an operator somewhere, I guess?
Yeah, you rang and they hooked you up to where you wanted to go, you know.
Yep.
And up in Watrous, where that phone company was, they had a cord board up there, and the lady that run it, when somebody would want to get hooked up, she'd answer, and hook cord up to
patch you through to your call.
Yep.
Literally connect your wire to the wire that goes to their house, and you guys could chat.
Exactly, yep.
Well, I appreciate all the information. Bud Scofield joining us here, 90 years old, on Saturday with Seniors. Thank you so much for your time and your stories, and just amazing. And you got a lot of years left in you, so I hope we have you again on the show in 10 years.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you having me on the air.
All right, all brought to you by FCCB, First Citizens Community Banks, local branches in Wellsboro, Mansfield, and Blossburg. FCCB, celebrating 150 years